Hey class, so this is actually the first time I've ever tried something like this, but I was thinking about a way to get you the information on multiple literacy strategies and multimodal text. From the night that I missed because of strep, you could probably still hear it a little bit in my voice, but regardless of that, I just wanted to walk you through this by not just looking at like my face and me talking or recording over, the PowerPoint with audio, but I wanted you to see some of like the resources or ways you can navigate um, the internet as well as like using my PowerPoint. So what this is going to be is a lecture where I'm showing you my screen as we go through it. So obviously you can see here that I'm going to go through a little bit of the PowerPoint or lecture notes, and I'm going to hit some of those high spots, and then I'm going to take you through a variation and look with me on my screen at some of the different options or ways you can incorporate multimodals in your own class. So let's jump into it. So the first question really always is, what is this, right? So let me start by saying, if you did a quick Google search, and we can do that together, and you looked up multiple, whoa, I don't know, what just happened on my screen? If you just looked up multiple literacies, right? So the first thing you're going to get is multiple literacies here, right? It's this thing that Google will provide you. And what I love about this right out of the gate is it tells you something that is often um, interchangeable. So you see here at the top says multiple literacies, sometimes referred to as multi-literacies or multimodal learning, has two definitions. I'm not necessarily concerned about the definition. What I want you to know from this is that when you're searching for something about multiple literacies, oftentimes you're going to see it as something called multimodal or multimodality. In my research studies with Dr. Young, who you guys will meet later in the semester, we've done a lot of stuff with multimodality and how you can use multimodality in a variety of ways. But really, what we're talking about in that fancy multimodality is multiple literacies, which is what we're going to talk about in this lecture. So if you hear me say multimodal text or multimodality or multimodals or some crazy multi something, know that really it's the same thing. I'm talking about multiple literacies. So what are multiple literacies? Well, I provided you the definitions or some context underneath each one of these, but really what you need to know is that multiple literacies breaks into four main areas, right? So they can be visual, digital, textual, or technological. And we're going to try to break these down as we go through. But when we talk about visual literacy, right, I love this quote by Braden and Horton. Of course, it's from 1982, so it's older. But what they say, it's the ability to understand and use images, including the ability to think, learn, and express oneself in terms of images. So what's interesting about this is that in my dissertation, one of the things that I did was which version, right? Version 8. One of the things that I focused on, because what I was doing is I was looking at three different high schools and their use of signs and posters. So really what I was looking at was a form of multiliteracy. And forgive this while it loads. If you see here at the bottom, or it's loading pages, well, there's 181 to load. So we can go back to this definition, and I'll come back to my dissertation to give you an example. So with visual literacy, one of the key components here is that an individual in contact with a visual image can not only understand the image, but think through and process it to learn about messaging themselves, whatever. But it's taking that visual component and learning to read it in context and reading it for like individual purpose. So let me give you an example of that. So in this incredibly long dissertation, here's what I was doing. So here's an example of one of the posters that really stood out to me from my dissertation. This is figure 1.1. And if you notice with this particular image, one of the things that jumped off the page to me immediately, sorry, I was trying to zoom in for you guys, was just the danger aspect or the negative slate that was on this image. So if you were using this as an example of visual literacy, what are some of the things that first like jump out to you? What are you learning from this image? Okay, now that you've thought about that, if we were in class, I'd ask you to give me some responses. But one of the things that jumped off to me when I was looking at this image was obvious, right? The first thing that my eyes went to wasn't necessarily the pill; it was the one pill can kill text, which is textual literacy. So right here, we have two things happening at once. We obviously have a visual image in that pill, but we also have the textual ability to read, write, and analyze text from an actual document. So this is visual and textual in nature. What I love about this particular image is that it can conjure up a range of emotions because of the visual. You see that a lot in visual imagery. I'm going to give you another example. There's just so many of them from my dissertation, and I obviously don't want to bore you with that. But how about this one, right? So the first visual cue that I got off of this was that it's lame, right? This is old. It looks old to me. It seems dated. It does not seem interesting. So the visual read I get before I even jump into the textual is just this feeling of like it's breakfast at Tiffany's or something. Let's do one more. This was really interesting in the study because in my experience, the first thing I did when I saw this, and although sexual assault is not a funny topic, but the image itself made me laugh because it just looks ridiculous, right? It looks staged, it looks silly. So visually, in my visual literacy, I laugh, I blow it off. However, in the textual literacy, this is really pertinent information and really important. So again, we have two things happening simultaneously, right? So we have this visual imagery and we have textual. So at this point, we are already diving in and using multiple literacies, right? You are engaging in multimodality when you're looking at a poster or an image, and that was a lot of my dissertation. The next one I want to talk about is digital. So a digital literacy is the ability to understand, evaluate, create, integrate information in multiple digital formats via the computer and the internet. Notice that this definition is from 1997, so it's a little outdated, but it's so simple that I think it still works today, even 20 years later. So the thing about digital literacy, so if we wanted to do a quick search here, and you wanted to look up digital literacies, obviously, like I said, you're going to get definitions, you're going to get different things, but I'm a visual learner. I like to look at like graphics and information. And so one of the ones that I typically try to dive into is this image, right, from Beyond the Horizon. This really shows me the range of digital literacy, right? To me, it kind of begins at this internet age and how we search digitally and read content, which translates to how we do that with textual literacy, the critical thinking that comes involved. But it goes on, and you can see here that this would even go to the next step of like building platforms, creating visual art, how to manipulate certain things. I actually used to be a graphic designer, so I used to design all the time, right? So here's my digital portfolio. And so much of this is digital literacy, right? Not necessarily the text, although text is important, right? But like, how did I create these images, right? How did I come up with these designs? Well, I had to know how to use the various Adobe Suite products, right? So I was learning something new while I was engaged in a whole different literacy practice, right? I didn't necessarily know I was doing digital literacy at the time, but I was. So digital literacy to me is super interesting because it covers this range of 21st century technologies. No, we don't want to resolve that now. Move that away. Okay, so when it comes to digital literacy, one of the things that I really want you to remember is that it involves a whole range of aspects from creativity to communication to practical and functional skills. And it has this globalized cultural and social understanding. Now we can reach out and look at different things, right? So let's say I wanted to go to, I'm a big fan of this. Check this book out. I've used this many times before. And I can't remember if I showed y'all this at the beginning of the year or not. So James Mollison is a photographer and a writer, and to me, this is a great insight into digital literacy because you have to look at these. And so the concept here is he went around and took photos of children and their bedrooms from all across the world. And what I think is really interesting about this really shows you like the cultural dynamic and perspective. So if you were to do a lesson, let's say you were doing this in your history class or social studies class about different cultures, and you were looking at this child here from America. You just showed them the image. Now they're engaged in visual and digital literacy because look, now you're showing how to navigate the content, you're showing them where to find these certain things, and you're introducing this cultural component, right? So it's a really interesting way of using a variety or multiple literacies in one lesson. So textual is obviously the one we're the most familiar with, right? This is read, write, analyze, evaluate text and literature, personal and professional documents. We do this all the time. So in the last one though, in technological, the big difference between technological and digital is digital can be like a range of things, right? So digital goes back to anything that's digital, whether it's online, whether it's music, whether it's on their phone, what have you. Whereas technological is using appropriate technology to do these functions. So this is where you're asking students to implement technology into the lesson to create something, right? So let me show you an example of this. So technological literacy, here's the definition, right? So use appropriate technology to communicate, solve problems, access, manage, integrate, evaluate, create information to improve learning in all subject areas, yada, yada, yammy, yammy. But we use this a lot. Storyboardthat.com. So what I love about this is look at what these kids are doing. They are creating like comic strips about the text, right? Or whatever it is they're learning. So look, here's one from Macbeth, and it gives you these different character synopsises, which is great. It's how we can kind of bring books to life. Let me show you how to use Storyboard. Super user friendly, but it's a great way for students to use their their textual literacy and incorporate it into a technological component. So let's say I gave people an assignment on Chicago in the 1950s, right? This is not my area of expertise, but let's say I was going to create a story about a young kid in Chicago. So I pull in a backdrop, I can find characters, right? So 1900s. Okay, so let's say maybe we were doing like the 1920s, right? We have this chick, right? She's doing her thing. And you get to create all, and I'm not going to waste your time and show you this, but it's fun to play with because then you could do the classical era, right? So let's drop this lady in. Obviously, we're off base here in terms of accuracy, but you get the point, right? And then you get to create this entire like comic revolving around whatever it is you're teaching. Okay, so there are the four major multiple literacies. Hopefully that gives you a quick insight into them. So why would we teach these, right? Well, there's a variety of ways, or the variety of reasons. The first one is because we are moving into the technological world that requires us to be literate in so many different functions. We learned that a few weeks ago with 21st century teaching. It's a great way for collaboration and integrating school library specialists, bringing experts of multiple literacies into your classroom and helping in that area. And you know that we accomplish this if we think back to our 21st century lesson that we did a few weeks ago. We want students to be able to read a picture, read an auditory story, read from multiple websites, but notice that I have reading in quotation marks because like I listen to podcasts or I listen to audiobooks, but I'm not technically engaged in like the reading process, but I still am at the same time. So the word read is a lot more complicated than the basic component that we used to think of it as reading text. It's a lot more diverse in society today. So as we break these down, I'm going to give you a little more depth into each one, right? So starting with visual. So look at all these different components that could be involved in visual literacy, right? Some of the ones that jump off the page to me, obviously evaluating images and using them effectively. They're at the bottom, the purple and the blue. I think finding images is really important. Like, how do we find them? What are their purpose? Are we just like doing a quick Google search and throwing it on there? Or are we purposefully using um, images to enhance something that we're doing? Ethically, right? Um, there's copyright laws, intellectual property, privacy, censorship. There's all types of different things that we have to do to evaluate ethically whether or not we can use said visual. And then creating these different images, right? So are we creating them for a purpose? Are they in their original format? In the age of Twitter, like, how many times have you seen something like this, right? Oh, sorry. I remember this one a lot. Hurricane Harvey shark photo. You familiar with this? So these images were going around, right? And people were saying, look at the sharks that are coming up from the hurricane. Yeah, like look at this guy, he even tweeted it. Like here's the thing. If you are visually literate, the first thing you would know is like factually, this is manipulated. Why? Well, first of all, a shark's not getting into. I don't even know where to begin with that. Like, it just baffles me that people think, yep, in Houston, it's definitely possible. Like, it was high waters from rain. So, first of all, like, that's not ocean water coming. I have a lot of questions, right? But just looking at the basic biology and the basic logic, you would know this isn't true. But you have to be able to evaluate the image and know like what looks photoshopped and what doesn't, or be smart enough to think like I should probably do a more thorough search, right? And then I find like these images are debunked, right? So yeah, it's interesting to me how stuff in the 21st century really spreads. We talked about where children sleep. So how can we use this as a strategy, right? So show students an image and talk about what it means to them. Have them make inferences. Have them make um, metaphors. They can develop whether or not it's an effective image and why. There's a lot of things you can do with images that really spark imagination and creativity in our students. All right, let's talk a little bit about digital literacy. So with digital literacy, we're really looking at these main areas, right? I think it's really important that we focus on the ability to find and select information, primarily because of the amount of quote hashtag fake news that's out there, and our ability to find information that is factual, and how do we know it's factual? The 21st century learner, we know, uses tools to capture, collect, assemble, create, and make information meaning. So we have to gather the appropriate websites and digital resources to make that work. In addition, we got to use Web 2.0 tools, right? Wikis, Wordles, voice threads, blogs. You want this is quick and easy. Did I put in 2.9? I did. My fault. Do a quick Google search of Web 2.0 tools and just look at the different ones that are out there, right? So let's do Internet for Classrooms. This is going to give you all these different blogs, apps, collaborative spaces, file converters, graphic organizers, you name it, right? So if I want my kids to make a Venn diagram, first, like what it is. Now let's have them make it. Oh, man. So this is the worst when you have to pay for something. This is why I did this with y'all, because it's like, okay, well, now we got to keep, going to the drawing board. But once you focused in on something, so let's say we wanted to do a Venn diagram, then now I just Google free Venn diagram maker. I'm going to go to the first one, see what it gives me, see if I can start designing it. I'm an educator. I'll sign in with Google. And now I'm in. Here we go. Right? And I have these different ones that I can then use and create text on top of. right? I can change this out to if we were doing, you know, whatever the content area was. Why do I have we're having a baby girl? We're not. Like, ignore that. Okay, let's make that go away before I have a stroke. But you get my point. Okay, so when we're looking at digital literacy, one of the things that I want you to think about too is how these all kind of work together. If the ultimate goal is expression, right, or written expression, then all of these things can build upon each other and work in tandem to help create textual literacy, which we've talked about, right? So when we're talking about textual literacy, I think it's also important, right? Ask students to compare text to audio or visual. So if they read the book, now they watch the movie, they make those comparisons. You're engaged in both, which I think is great. Think about how you can incorporate textual literacy into the technological one, because this flows right into it. Using these different applications and having students create literacy moments that are not only textual in nature because they're writing, but also digital or technological. Okay, so as we're thinking about these different technologies, right? How do we use these various sites to bolster their communication practices, right? Collaboration spaces, online communication, social networking. Using multiple literacies can have this positive impact on student engagement. We know that from the research, right? We know that using multiple types of literacy can engage learners far more than the traditional means. So when you're thinking about your lessons, what I would like you to think about, and I'll ask you in Google Classroom, not in Google Classroom, we're not using that, I'm sorry. I'll ask you on the Blackboard thread in the coming weeks, and I'll send out an email when we're going to do this, to walk me through another lesson that you incorporates multiple literacies. So you're going to tell me, here's the lesson. I'm going to use visual literacy, and how are you going to incorporate something visually literate to help bolster that particular lesson? So that's the quick of it. Thank you guys for hopping in and listening to this. I appreciate you. And